for joining us for this UNDP launch of our report on the graduation of LDCs, emerging issues in a changed development landscape. We are very pleased to be collaborating to bring this report to you. And without much ado, I'd like to introduce the Regional Director for the Africa Bureau at UNDP and UN Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Ahuna Ezeakonwa. Over to you, Ahuna.
Thank you, Raymond. Excellencies, distinguished participants. Let me join our program director this morning from New York in welcoming you warmly to this event. We stand before an unfortunate and pestering reality that 50 years since the creation of the category of least developed countries, it remains predominantly a territory of sub-Saharan African countries. To date, 33 out of the 47 LDCs are from sub-Saharan Africa. For these nations, the capacity to overcome structural vulnerabilities remains unattained. The very creation of the LDC group signaled already in 1971 that these countries merited special attention, that we are still where we are, a situation only worsened now by the COVID-19 pandemic, should have all of us thinking about what new approaches will be needed to unlock the potential of LDCs to meet their development aspirations, especially as they face the multiple complexities of health, socioeconomic and macroeconomic effects of this pandemic. Overcoming these root causes and constraints is quite urgent, not least because of the further setback of human development amidst the pandemic. A new UNDP study that we are here to launch today, which is titled Graduation of African Least Developed Countries, Emerging Issues in a Development Landscape, sheds some light on 6 key lessons that have been learned from the pace and speed of graduation in Africa. Lessons we hope can guide a more holistic interrogation of the development imperatives around LDC graduation. First, graduation is not an end in itself. It is a means of attainment of sustainable development, and we need to be very clear on this. The focus should not be on the process per se, nor on checking boxes in the criteria. Rather, it should be about laying the foundations that build resilience so that countries remain on a robust upward development trajectory, even as they exit this category. Recently graduated countries like Botswana, Equatorial Guinea, Cabo Verde, and Angola tell a compelling story of the importance of building diversified economies as a basis for sustained economic and human development. The second lesson is that sustaining progress after graduation takes more than passing one threshold, particularly for those countries that met the income graduation only criteria. We are finding that although higher levels of income are important, equally important are stronger foundations in other dimensions of development, like human assets, for instance, nutrition, health, education, the whole area around human capital formations. And of course, economic vulnerability, population size, remoteness of populations from the central part of service delivery, merchandise export concentration, to mention just a few. A main lesson here is that resource-rich countries must invest windfalls earlier on in human and physical assets to ensure sustained graduation. Thirdly, is that we need to align graduation criteria to global development frameworks, like the SDGs, for instance. The graduation criteria has to be responsive to the development paradigms of the times we live in and the times that we're facing. The Decade of Action is an opportunity, for instance, to reset criteria, embed in more focus areas and the milestones that we would like to see to propel countries towards sustainable graduation. The fourth lesson is that we must celebrate the wins along the graduation path. Although many countries have not graduated or met the graduation threshold yet, we noticed that there are significant shifts taking place in quite a few countries, whether it's Ethiopia, Senegal, Rwanda, Mozambique. These countries are facing huge challenges as well, but there we see in pre-COVID times, consistent growing of the economies at over 7%. And these economies were actually seeing investments in human and physical assets from that economic growth. So a shared kind of growth models that are emerging. These are welcome efforts for resilience building for the long term. Fifth lesson is that there is an abundance of opportunities amidst challenges, from Africa's young demography, expanding middle class. We have a swelling business opportunity landscape on the continent. The African Continental Free Trade Area, which started trading beginning of this year, the rise of the global south, so to speak, and rapid technological advancements that we are seeing on the continent and elsewhere. And these all can be harnessed to accelerate transformation and the development of most of the LDCs. Finally, the last lesson here was the perceived loss of international support measures continues to drive reluctance to graduate from the LDC category, even if these are not fully maximized by most LDCs. There is clearly a need to raise awareness around ISMs to really inform LDC actions, especially for transitional planning. So looking ahead, what are we seeing here? The next LDC program of action offers an opportunity for the great LDC reset. This reset must design a future that looks beyond recovery, which of course is important, and we're all in the middle of it now, but it must also look beyond that towards 2030. So we don't stop with saying, the immediate recovery needs, but really investing in reaching the 2030 agendas. We are proposing that the new LDC program of action be framed around the promise and opportunities within LDCs, not just driven by the problems and challenges that could actually be stifling in terms of the psychology of the energy we need to move forward. And these are some areas that we propose that should be looked at along the lens that we're suggesting. One is creating linkages in economies and emphasizing entrepreneurship development. This would really focus on economic diversification. It will focus on job creation, looking at really job-rich growth and increasing labor productivity for the transformation of African LDCs, especially those with high shares of informality, and it's up to 70% of their economies in some cases. The second is enhancing productive capacity. I don't think there's any shortcuts to this and any way around it. Increased public investments in education, in public health, in social security, and enabling physical infrastructure. I think everyone is in agreement that we cannot avoid looking at physical infrastructure as one of the key ingredients of this future pathway. And these are urgent in their nature. Otherwise, LDCs will continue to see reversals in human development like we have seen during COVID-19. The third proposal is to strengthen regional integration, and the AFCFTA, without a doubt, is a lifeline for Africa. We must actively support its implementation to ensure that it unlocks Africa's manufacturing potential, boosts regional trade, and ensures inclusive growth. And this week, we were proud at UNDP to launch our first formal agreement and partnership with the AFCFTA Secretariat, precisely to support accelerated implementation. Fourth is to enhance South-South cooperation. Here we must prioritize technology transfer, mobilize development finance, and harness the continent's large renewable energy potential, varying in type across diverse geographic areas. And fifth is that we have to foster the fourth industrial revolution. Africa can lead the fourth industrial revolution, and we are quite confident about this statement that we must invest in taking Africa's innovations to industrial application to solve complex and real societal problems. UNDP profiled last year's 50 top innovations that tackled COVID-19 in Africa Innovates magazine. LDCs will have to integrate the digital revolution as a structuring marker of how they can act faster and more effectively, considering the most disadvantaged. Fifth and last is enhancing resource mobilization. That this means this remains an Achilles heel for most LDCs, even in non-pandemic times. Incorporating the COVID-19 recovery and making available resources for the implementation of the next program of action is key to the decade of action. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, at UNDP, our renewed strategic offer in Africa is a response to a reinvigorated LDC graduation program. It's focused on core development pillars like natural resource governance, sustainable energy, youth and women empowerment, structural transformation, climate adaptation, and focus on peace and security are all core pieces of unlocking the LDC promise. International support measures must be aligned to drive investments in these areas. And we really look forward to hearing your views and experiences, especially on how we can build strong coalitions and build momentum towards an LDC program of action for the decade of action in the LDCs. I thank you very much for your patience in listening to this long opening. Back to you, Raymond.
Thank you very much for those very invigorating opening remarks. You mentioned that graduation is not an end in itself, but it's an important step towards economic transformation that is substantial, sustainable, equitable, and sustained. You also called for an LDC reset that looks beyond recovery. I think those are broad themes that resonate throughout the report. Next, I'd like to introduce and welcome His Excellency Perks C. Ligoya, who is the permanent representative of the Republic of Malawi to the United Nations and Global LDC's chair. Your Excellency, you're welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. Madam Mahuna is Konwa, ASG and Assistant Administrator and Director, Regional Bureau for Africa. Madame Wikoranja, ASG and Assistant Administrator and Director, Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, Madame Fekita, USG and High Representative, OHRLLS, Excellencies, all panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to deliver these remarks in my capacity as chair of the LDC group. I start by thanking UNDP for the support rendered to our countries in collaboration with OHRLLS over the duration of the existence of the LDC group. Furthermore, it is my honor this morning to be part of this important and timely discussion. I want to quote the UN Administrator, Akim Steiner, who has repeated several times that the LDC group is the raison d'etre of UNDP. And that is well substantiated by the work that UNDP is doing, continues to do. And this is evidence of the work you have done on this dialogue on graduation of African LDCs, emerging issues in a new development landscape. I want to thank Madame Ezia Konwa for her remarks and advice on the way forward to Doha. I'm proud to say that the road to Doha has truly started. As you know, we had the African Regional Review meeting in Malawi in February. That went on very well, and we were actually overwhelmed with the support and presence, even though it was virtual, but the participation was very good. Now, the issue of graduation is a pertinent issue for all LDCs, and not only LDCs, but I think the whole ECOSOG, G77, and UN agencies are helping us, including UNDESA, are helping us on this issue of graduation. The Istanbul Program of Action had set an ambitious objective of enabling half of the LDCs to meet the criteria for graduation by 2020. And as you know, this is has not been possible, as only a few countries have graduated. I heard the ASG mentioning the issue of Angola as being one of the countries that was had met all the criteria for graduation. They wrote asking for an extension because of the problems that all of us are meeting due to the COVID-19. And I'm glad to say that the extension was granted. And the timeline now is for 2024. I don't want to preempt your report, because I know that you will be giving us that report, which I hope will tell us who is on the queue for graduation and prospects for African countries. The fear we all have is that one that and the report, I think, mentions that if we go at the pace we are going now, by 2035, we may see that only sub-Saharan African countries will remain in this group of LDCs. So we need to work very hard that we have as many countries to graduate from the LDC group. Now, the worry today, I mean, we should not hide the fact that countries are not sure today that graduation will bring them benefits. Others are thinking that instead of being rewarded for graduation, countries are punished for that. You may be well aware that after graduation, there is a grace period of 3 years, and that after the grace period, all the benefits and be it trade or otherwise are removed. We have and continue to ask for more time to allow countries that have graduated to have more time to adjust to their new situation. I have listened with interest, again, the priorities set by the ASG on how the LDC 5 should be shaped, creating linkages, enterprises, labor productivity, productive capacity, integration, resource mobilization. I'm glad to tell you that all those topics are on the table, even in our first intergovernmental preparatory committee that will be held very soon. We have come up with 6 themes for the panel discussions of the first session of the Intergovernmental Preparatory Committee. And the input you have given us, to my knowledge, is already well embedded in these themes. The first one being investing in people in LDCs, eradicating poverty and enhancing accountability to leave no one behind. And under that, we have issues of building sustainable, equitable, and resilient recovery from COVID-19, good governance, social protection systems, eradicating all forms of dimensions of poverty and hunger, achieving universal access to quality education and health. The 5 minutes that I have will not allow me to go through all the themes, but I want to assure you that all the areas mentioned by the ASG are well covered in our thinking. And I'm very glad that our co-chair of the PrepCom, the Excellency Ambassador Rabab from Bangladesh is with us, because she has a lot to say on the issue of graduation. I'm very keen to listen to the conclusions of the study, and I'm sure that my colleagues from the LDC group are also very keen to listen and ask questions coming out of our discussion. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for, among other things, reminding us that the LDC group is the raison d'etre for UNDP. And this is why this event is not just an Africa issue. We have partnered with Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, and we're really pleased to have the director, the UNDP's Director for Asia and the Pacific, Ms. Kani Wignaraja, here with us, and she's going to also give us a welcome message. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Raymond and Excellencies. Thank you, Ahuna. It is really, I'm so pleased to be here together, and also to see our PRs from both regions here. I think the most important thing is hearing from you and also hearing each other, because 50 years on, we, I think, now are at a moment in time where our expectations have changed as countries. Our measures have to change with them. And maybe it is a more fundamental shift. And I very much heard His Excellency our PR Malawi, that the worries and anxieties, maybe a lot of it is based because we were pegged 50 years ago to a certain set of incentives and measures. And that world has changed. And it is a collective demand for a different set of incentives and measures that our countries need going forward. So that to me is, I want 2 main points. That to me is our key is what are we asking for as a group in terms of new ways of being measured and being recognized for what is being done, because we are moving into a whole new world of investment and development financing. And my second point, and this is a lesson from all the countries here that are present here today, is that we have learned that it is not always best to follow the same unsustainable paths of others. And that some of our countries here are showing that there are bolder new ways, more sustainable ways of moving forward. And hence the incentives and the promise of support to those pathways form that new package and that new ask going forward to support these countries, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Asia and the Pacific. So I just wanted to put those 2 points on the table to frame also our discussion and our learning from you going forward. Back to you, Raymond.
Thank you so much for reminding us that what we are doing is we are innovating. We're looking at new ways of being recognized and new ways of tackling this issue that has been with us for over 5 decades, this issue of LDC and graduation. And it ties in really well with Ahuna's point about looking beyond recovery and seeing COVID as a pivotal point. We are very, 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 very pleased to have with us Under Secretary General Fekita Utoy Kamanu, who is the High Representative for UNOHRLLS. She oversees a lot of what we are talking about here today, LDC and LDC graduation. Pleased to have her here. Looking forward to your remarks and welcome.
Thank you, Raymond. Good morning and good afternoon, Ambassador Legoya, Permanent Representative of Malawi and Global Chair of the LDC Group, Excellencies and distinguished colleagues. My appreciation to my colleagues, ASP, Ms. Ahuna Esiakonwa and Ms. Kani Wignaraja, for organizing this event. And we are extremely happy to see this UNDP report come to life on an issue, African LDC graduation, that is very close to our hearts, and in particular as we move towards the 5th UN conference on LDCs next year in Qatar. First, let me highlight that more countries have currently met the graduation criteria or in the process of graduating than ever before. We have not reached the objective of the Istanbul Programme of Action fully, but with 3 LDCs having graduated since 2011, and now we have 16 LDCs at various stages of graduation process, we got pretty close. And this February, the Committee for Development Policy identified 5 new LDCs meeting the graduation threshold, 4 of which are in the African region. And this is a welcome change to previous trends. The IPOA also flagged that it is vital that countries graduating from the LDC category are eased onto a sustainable path without any disruption to their development plans, programs, and projects. And we all know that while graduation is an important milestone, the graduating countries are still very vulnerable and in need of continued support. Thus, my office has stepped up support to LDCs in the various stages of the graduation process over the past years. We've established the Interagency Task Force on Graduation of LDCs, chaired by the director of my office, which meets about 4 times a year with a view to ensure UN offices and agencies are consistent and coherent in our support to graduating LDCs. Some of the tangible changes that have been implemented through this task force include integrated missions to Sao Tome and Principe and Solomon Islands, which provided the opportunity for UN entities to work together and reduce the burden on individual agency missions on the host country as well as the resident coordinator's office, and enhance information sharing related to providing support to LDCs in the graduation process, which has reduced the duplication of work and shown gaps in support that could be filled. And these missions further provided in-depth information about the potential effects of graduation and facilitated discussions with various stakeholders, including the private sector and civil society. They also included engagement between the government of graduating countries and their development partners in order to discuss the needs for continued and new support. We look forward to continuing to coordinate this important work. Now, as we enter April, we are only 10 months away from the LDC 5 conference taking place in Doha, Qatar in January 2022. Member states will soon be debating and deciding what will be the next program of action for the LDCs. This moment provides us with an opportunity to take a new approach. Using the findings of the UNDP's new report, we can together find new solutions to the challenges ahead. Some questions we should be asking ourselves are, how can we as the international community better support LDCs, especially African LDCs, so that they can achieve the GNI, human asset and economic vulnerability targets necessary for meeting the graduation criteria? And are there new support measures or criteria that can be created to help the LDCs get to and through graduation in a sustainable manner? I'm confident that some of these questions will be discussed throughout this the event this morning, and my office stands ready to work collaboratively with UNDP, United Nations agencies, member states, and other stakeholders to ensure that we're providing the best possible support to all LDCs in their efforts to achieve sustainable development. I thank you.
Thank you so much, USG Fekita, for reminding us that while graduation is indeed an important milestone, graduating countries remain fragile and vulnerable and do need continued support. I think one of the challenges that we do have is, how do we reimagine how to support countries even after they have gone over this particular hurdle, that of graduation? A lot of these issues are highlighted in the report, and we have 2 of the report's leaders here with us today who are going to talk us through very briefly some of the key highlights from this report. And following that, we'll have a panel discussion, which will feature a number of permanent representatives from selected countries, and we'll be able to explore these issues in a little bit more detail. So let me turn over to the 2 co-authors, Ms. Eunice Kamwendo, Strategic Advisor at the Regional Bureau for Africa, and Mr. Swanim Wagle, who is Senior Team Leader on Strategy, Policy, and Partnership in the Asia Pacific Bureau. Over to you, Eunice.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Let me just start by recognizing all the distinguished members, the Global Chair of LDCs, the USG for UNOHRLS, of the regional directors that are present here, and all of the other PRs and member states that are present, and I see that we do have quite a good number of us on the call. I will share, and mine is going to be brief. I'm going to introduce the report itself, and like we started before, this is a collaborative effort that we've done between ourselves and the Asia and Pacific Bureau, quite organic in that sense, and primarily because, of course, of the number of LDCs that we have in our region. So just give me a moment, I just need to share my screen. Not sure why. Okay, unfortunately I can't. I don't know, Swanim, I know that I shared my presentation with you. Could you try for me? For whatever reason, I can't do it on my end.
Let me try. You can keep on speaking. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So really a great pleasure for me to introduce this report, and it is a work that started a few years back, and important also to look at some of the reasons what compelled us to actually do this report. And just to thank, of course, a lot of colleagues that helped us in terms of, one, the initial thinking as to why, and I'll speak a little bit more on why did we do this report. We had a few questions that led us to where we are today. Of course, the slow pace of graduation for a lot of the countries was a concern, especially for the region that we're coming from, that we have the bulk of that, 33 out of the 46 or 47 of LDCs, which is quite a large number. And of course, it is quite a concern for us from the regional perspective. We also wanted to look at the opportunities and challenges that a lot of the LDCs face. And of course, a lot of these are some that they're nothing new, but of course, there are a lot of new opportunities that we felt we needed to really work around to help LDC to unleash the potential of a lot of the LDCs. And of course, as part of the most critical contribution of this report was to see how we can actually contribute to the next program of action. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I will share a few three pivotal moments that really helped us or propelled us to write this report. First of all, like I mentioned before, was a slow pace of graduation, but I want to share a story on this one, which I think resonates with a lot of us. And it goes back to 2018, I think, while we were presiding over, through the invitation of UNOHRLS at the point, we were presiding over a meeting with LDC focal points. And we had a very rude interruption by some NGO member who came in the room and basically said, I don't understand why this group meets every year and it's been going on for years, there's no progress. Why would you want the UN to group you in this category, and yet it's not benefiting for you in one way or the other? I must say it was a very uncomfortable position to be in, not only for the ones that were moderating, but also for the countries themselves. But there's a reason why the group was created, and I think that the reason and the reasoning at that point still resonates, because these are a group of countries that have massive challenges, both structurally, but also if you look in terms of fiscal space and so on, that the fact that there are special measures that are put in place, I think it's a good thing. But at the same time, I think it's critically important to see that there's actually a need to move out of this category and countries actually accelerate and graduate from the category. Second, if you can just stay on that same slide, thank you. And I will only go on this slide, I won't go further than this. Second was an issue that Ahuna had, the regional director had mentioned in her remarks, when you look at, we had a situation in 2017 where Equatorial Guinea had graduated, and it had graduated on an income-only measure. And at that time, I think 10 years prior to that, the country was doing great. But with the global price market crisis in 2015 and onwards, I think we had then seen the country facing a lot of volatility in terms of their growth. So of course, as a country, they came back and said, we only graduated on an income-only measure, and yet we're facing huge challenges as well. So for us, it was also an attempt to look, first of all, which goes to the number 3, if you look at the bullet there, is the graduation criteria, are there opportunities that we can, look into that and improve it? So yes, I know that, there's our colleagues in UN DESA, there's a lot input that goes into there, but perhaps there are other considerations that, need to be made in this regard. But that is also not to say that as a country, Equatorial Guinea, perhaps it could have invested a little bit different in times that they had a lot of windfall from oil prices and so on. But this is a conversation I think that we do need to keep having, because we do see another country as Angola in this sense, in the same area as Equatorial Guinea, and policy discussions have to be held in that sense. And thirdly, of course, we were, as UNDP ourselves, also undergoing an evaluation on our work on LDCs and of course on poverty, and this was 2018, 2019. And what this helped us, both the report, but also the conversations that we're having, we're wanting to see how can we support LDCs more intently and better in terms of our programming as UNDP. So all of those 3 pivotal moments, I think, really forced us and compelled us to dig deep and have a further understanding on all of the difficult challenges that this group of countries face. And lastly, I mean, we did talk about, and I think a lot of it has already come through, including from the LDC Global Chair that talked about the huge structural impediments that a lot of the LDCs face. I think that will continue over the longest time. But it really is important to ensure that we do not miss on the abundant opportunities that exist. And like the regional director had said, Ahuna, when she talked about our new offer to the continent, I think it really builds on all of these opportunities that we should tap into. So we will, of course, in terms of the report, Swanim will take us through, and in terms of the way it's laid out, it actually follows through a lot of the 5 key points that we've put forward in this sense, in terms of the pace of graduation itself, the graduation process, and looking at the report looks at case studies on all of the countries that have graduated, but also those that are near graduation, and really to look at the DNA of those countries and see where can we come in that sense. So without further much ado, I will hand over to Swanim to take us through the details of the report.
Thank you, Eunice. Now, I am very conscious of the time, so I will try to shorten my presentation and just walk you through a key set of messages. The first thing to note is really that LDCs matter, obviously, and it's the power of the head count, right? Economic clout is constrained, FDI, GDP, exports, and all that. But we're talking about close to 800 million people, and this collective power of the head count is really what puts the LDCs on the map, and this is our moral and our economic and our social case. And but the countries that have been deemed to have been classified as LDCs over the last 50 years, we started with a very short list of 25. It went up to almost 50. Now we're trying to whittle down the list. But there are the pace of graduation has been slow. And there are concerns. The 2 major concerns that we hear from the countries is obviously our exposure to shocks. So this could be natural calamities as we've faced over the last 10, 15 years, starting with the Maldives, Samoa, Vanuatu, Nepal, but also with COVID coming into the picture, we've already seen that the transition period for the countries that are in the pipeline has been extended to 5 years, for example. A more fundamental and substantive concern is regarding the perceived loss of all the concessions that the international support measures lend, in terms of ODA, in terms of preferential market access, special and differential treatment in the WTO. And even if you talk to the bureaucrats, and I was in government just before this, big concern is the scholarships and the travel support that many LDCs receive, right? So we do have to manage this. This does not loom large in the larger scheme of things when you take into account the ODA, the FDI, the global output and all that, but these things do have to be acknowledged. And the benefits, which is often not highlighted as prominently as we would like, is, and this is a significant milestone in every country's journey. It galvanizes development efforts, it psychologically uplifts political consensus, and what I would like to argue is empirically validate a strategic direction, and this is very important. In terms of sending signals to international markets, finance, credit rating, trade or FDI, replacing gradually ODA needs, I think is also an important benefit that is often not highlighted. So I think this is important to acknowledge. Now, there is a welcome effort on the part of DESA and other UN agencies to constantly revise the eligibility criteria. The latest one was done last March. There have been some innovations introduced in the Human Assets Index, in the Economic Vulnerability Index. But I think I want to link this with this whole fast-moving science of composite indicators. And here I think we're maybe lagging a little bit behind. I think the theoretical framework that we started with in classifying LDCs, this is really to capture the structural weaknesses. That was the very sort of starting point, the raison d'etre in 1971. I think there's a lot of movement along this, the theoretical paradigm of how we assess, how we measure, how we understand development. And I think there's some catching up to do. The selection of variables and how we, because whatever is badly defined is badly measured. So I think there's some improvements that we need to make there. Many of the indicators that we're looking are first generation development indicators, looking mostly at quantity. I think the debate has moved towards quality, but there are data constraints. I think this needs to be acknowledged. There's a lot of indicators that overlap with each other, and these things need to be taken care of. And the way we normalize, we weight and aggregate many of these indicators are important, because the way we aggregate has implications on whether we're substituting one for the other. And in the recent development discourse, some of the indicators can be argued to be less substitutable. So we don't want countries to be gaming the system, for example. So there are all these. So the plea here is really that the science of composite indicators has to be taken on board when we refine this. A more fundamental acknowledgement, I guess, is on the shift that is happening in development thinking. Again, over the last 50 years, a lot has happened. I think we have succeeded, especially with the UNDP's move towards the human development paradigm, in really changing the discourse from income to non-income. But with the SDGs, I think there's another level that we have reached, which is the whole science of complexity, non-linearity, and this sort of well-rounded concept of development that has to be taken on board. So this move from a sectoral, siloed approach to the whole systems-based analysis. I think that's very important. Economic diversification for a long time was about producing and exporting new goods or entering new markets, and we're really counting countries and counting products. There too, the literature has caught up, and we're really talking about national asset portfolios, natural capital, built capital, public institutions. These things have become very important in the literature on economic diversification. So it's no longer just counting beans in terms of products and markets. I think that there we need to really look into this issue anew. A structural transformation, again, for a long time, it was about shifting labor and other productive resources away from agriculture towards industry and later into services. This was for many decades at the heart of LDC graduation processes. But now it's not so much just this linear process of reallocating resources, but it's augmenting intra-sectoral productivity, inter-sectoral productivity. And there are many puzzles here. So if we follow the works of Dani Roderick, for example, who has documented the African manufacturing puzzle with taking Tanzania and Ethiopia, for example. And in the case of Asia, he's talked about premature deindustrialization. Countries are peaking at levels of income way below what we saw with the East Asian countries going ahead in the 70s and the 80s. So there are these puzzles that we need to incorporate in our development discourse. The technological change that has been talked about, I don't need to belabor the point, but how do we make our young demographies ready for this? And there, the learning crisis is very prominent. While all these opportunities are on the horizon, our kids are beginning to go to school. There's universal primary enrollment in almost all of Asia, many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, but learning has not matched the enrollments, right? So this learning crisis has to be really taken up. And finally, on the vulnerability agenda, also, I think there's this big shift now from just talking about weaknesses and defenselessness to a more sophisticated notion of risks, sense of insecurity, dealing with shocks, and how do we handle catastrophic insurances and things like that. So all these issues are in the report. I'm not going to explain much more. This is just to highlight the sort of the approach we're taking. Eunice has talked about this, so I won't go into the details, but there are opportunities. So young demography, the rise of the South in terms of concessional finance, new markets, new sources of South-South FDI, tourism, and all that are there, but we need connectivity, both physical connectivity and virtual connectivity. That really is the message. And this rapid urbanization, the fact that a growing share of the middle class will be living in large cities is something. Oftentimes development was equated as a rural phenomenon. This is no longer the case. In 1990, there were just 10 megacities in the world that had more than 10 million people. By 2030, in less than 10 years, we'll have 40 megacities that will house 1/10 of the world population, and only 5 of those 40 will be in the rich countries. The other 35 will be in developing countries, including many in Africa and Asia. So, these shifts, I think, will need to be acknowledged. On the risks, these are well-known risks, but some of them, again, borrowing from the latest literature, we could be tackling these issues slightly differently. The resource curse, as it manifests in slowing economic growth, in propelling conflicts, and the abundance in oil and minerals often associated with less democratic forms of governance. I mean, this is what we know. Planetary exertions, the HDR 2020 does this very well in terms of situating even the latest pandemic in the larger imbalance that we're seeing and the excesses that we're exerting on the planet, and the shifting production paradigms, right? Fragmentation, digitalization, AI, automation, and all that is on. So finally, I think on the action ahead, if we accept some of the ideas that have been proposed in this report, suggestions, nudges to think many of these development issues anew, afresh, I think there are new responsibilities and new tasks to be taken up by all of us, UN and developing partners. There are these General Assembly resolutions talking about smooth transition out of LDC status from 2004, 2012. Maybe there's one we could do as many of these countries are in the pipeline regarding how do we ensure an orderly transition. So there's a big responsibility there for UN and our partners. Think tanks and researchers, if we are positing that many of the issues that we associated with the LDCs are undergoing a fundamental shift, then I think, again, on economic diversification, issues of atypical structural transformation, these need new research inputs, and our think tanks, the Southern think tanks, really should be leading the way in this. But ultimately, a lot of the onus is on national governments, and this is where the industrial policies, trade policies, fiscal policies will need to come in, and COVID accentuates the urgency of many of that. We're not going back to the hard interventions that really distort prices and to deal with Marshallian externalities, but it's really the softer coordination challenges, I think, that have really come to the fore. So let me stop here, and if needed, I'll come in the final session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eunice and Swami, for sharing with us some of the key takeaways from this great report. Talked about some of the innovations in thinking through eligibility, the indices fit for purpose. I like the point about non-linear complexity when thinking about everything from economic transformation to how we understand the impacts of graduation, recovery from shocks, including COVID, redefining vulnerability and putting a lot more emphasis on risk management. These are all issues that resonate. Now we have some time for a little bit of time for a panel discussion. We're really pleased to have a very august panel with us. And I'll just introduce each before they speak. I'm going to appeal for brevity. So we'll have some time to engage in the Q&A. And for our 168 attendees, I'll encourage you to write your comments or questions in the Q&A box. And hopefully at the end, we'll have time to pose some of these questions to our panelists and also to our distinguished speakers. So we have a little bit of a conversation. Let me start by recognizing and welcoming His Excellency Sheikh Niang, who is permanent representative to the UN of the Republic of Senegal. And Your Excellency, what are some of the policy actions taken at country level to meet the graduation criteria in Senegal? And could you probably also just say a little bit about the COVID effect and what impact it's had on the plans for graduation? Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. But first of all, let me thank the UNDP for initiating this meeting. And I would like to extend my thanks particularly to my sister Ahuna, but also to my sister Fiketa Moyalef and USG for the very good job she is doing. And also to my brother, Perks, the chairman of the LDC group. And also I would like to thank also Kani for her presentation and also the presentation made by Eunice and Swani. And I would like also Eunice and Swani to please share the very important enlightening document they have just presented. I think they are very useful and they should be shared outside this event. But let me, my dear moderator, seek your indulgence because I have to co-chair a very crucial meeting from 11:45. So I intend to sign off at 11:45. I wish I could stay until 12, but I would have to leave. Let me also say that I much welcome the holding of this panel. I think it's good sometimes to go out of our formal meetings and just think about the box, outside the box, and try to think deeper to see how we can address all the concerns of the LDCs. And leading up to the 5th United Nations Conference on LDCs, we truly need to highlight and assess both strong points and the weak points of the Istanbul program, and see how the strong points can be bolstered, and see how the weak ones can be corrected, and how failures can be transformed into lessons for the next program. Against that background, as Senegal has been recently proposed for graduation, I would like to quickly talk about 3 things. First of all, I would speak about my country's experience in implementing the Istanbul program. Secondly, I will show you how we conducted the preparation of our graduation, for our graduation. And finally, I will conclude by highlighting the lessons we have learned and which could inform the next program of action so as to make it for the LDCs, to make the program more impactful. So let me start with the first point, which is the implementation by Senegal of the Istanbul program of action. You know, in Senegal, we have a plan, which have a reference framework plan for the government, for public policies. And the plan is called the Emerging Senegal Plan. And in establishing that plan, my country has literally absorbed and mainstreamed all the main international development agendas, notably Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063, and also the Istanbul Plan of Action in that plan. Therefore, all the 8 priority areas of the Istanbul action plan, like the production of capacities, first capacities, agriculture, food security, trade development, and commodities, human and social development, management of multiple crises and other new challenges, mobilization of resources for development and capacity building. All those priorities have been aligned within the three main axes of our national plan. And those three main axes are, first, the structural transformation of the economy and growth. Secondly, human capital, social protection, and sustainable development. And three, governance, institutions, peace, and security. In doing this, we have been able to really avoid parallel actions or duplication of interventions, and above all, to create a common platform for international development agents. In concrete terms, since the adoption of the Istanbul program, we have witnessed significant results in the implementation of our national plan, of the programs and projects, notably the strengthening of public investment in agriculture and infrastructure. We have done a lot of construction and rehabilitation of roads and motorways. We have revived industries, and we have also introduced a new universal health coverage, which actually covers children from 0 to 5 and all people over 60, and also giving family grants to support the poor, among other aspects of the plan. In addition to the gradual reduction of its budget deficit, we have also experienced average growth estimated at more than 6% over the period of 2014 to 2019. And inflation has remained below 3% over the period from 2014 to 2008, which is really in line with the standard established by the West African Economic Monetary Union, we call in French UEMOA. This progress has been fostered by key reforms undertaken to improve the business environment, notably by establishing a kind of automation of administrative procedures, by establishing an incentives and simplified tax and legal and simplified legal system, and also by improving the competitiveness of production factors, and also by promoting investment with a high social economic impact. As a result, Senegal has achieved impressive results, which has enabled us to meet the graduation criteria. So we have three main results. First of all, the gross national income per capita has risen from $545 in 2000 to $1,240 in 2018, which is an increase of over 120%. And secondly, the human capital index rose from 36.06 in 2000 to 57.1 in 2018. And third and finally, the economic vulnerability index went from 4.86 in 2000 to 36.1 in 2012 and to 33 in 2018, slightly above the threshold of 32. So the evolution of these three ranking criteria between 2018 and 2018, so in 18 years, shows that Senegal has made significant progress that predisposes to graduation. This brings me to my second, which is how we did to prepare for graduation. First, naturally, like any other country proposed for graduation, Senegal welcomes the confidence placed in it, but does not fall into euphoria because the economy is still marked by structural constraints that affect the quality of growth. Notably, we have an enormous size of the informal sector, which is had to be taken care of. You are mentioning COVID, and COVID suffered a lot. The informal sector suffered a lot from COVID because there were measures taken by the government. There was a curfew, there was a state of emergency, and they were not able to work in the way they used to do. So the fallback was really, really heavy. And in addition to that, also we still have a sizable unemployment gap, despite heavy state investment to support youth employment, and the private sector does not hire much. I don't know whether you follow the the news in Senegal recently. I think because of so many factors where the youth were confronted with joblessness, and where also people working in the formal sector were able to work properly. I think all that created that outburst of violence we saw in Senegal. But fortunately, the institutions were very strong, and they remain so. And I think the government also has taken measures to protect them.
Your Excellency, do forgive my interruption, but may I appeal for you to round up, as we have 3 more panelists and we'll be ending at 11:30.
Okay, I will do so. So I think now what I'm going to do, I'm going to move to the third point, because I have elaborated enough on the second point. I mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic as being also a concern and impacting also our policies. Let me just go to my last part and give you the lessons we have learned. And my remarks concern mainly 2 elements, which is, first of all, we have to address what we think all countries have to do, all leaders have to do, is to address economic vulnerability. Make sure that we raise the level of productive investment, we consolidate value chains, and we put in place at the territorial level development support infrastructures in order to support growth generating economic sectors. And also, I think we also have to invest in economic development, in the productive forces, and also try to diversify our economies so as we can generate additional incomes, and also broaden also the tax base. Also, we should think of also facilitating access to long-term finance, including low-interest concessional loans. That is also one thing we should do. Combating also illicit financial flows is a must. We have to do it. This now leads me to the last point of my the third part of my presentation, which is what I call ecological vulnerability, because exposure to climate change has become a threat to all humanity, and particularly the LDCs are most vulnerable to all. That's why I think the application of the 3 conventions, the Rio Conventions on climate change, biological diversity, and desertification must be, let's say, implemented and guide our steps. And we also must make sure that we call on our partners to support the fight against environment degradation. And I think in doing so, the LDCs will benefit from that. So in conclusion, I would like just to stress that graduation must be supervised and supported, and it must reflect also the gradual improvement of the socio-economic well-being of the population. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you for giving me the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those excellent points on development in Senegal in this regard. It now gives me great pleasure to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Rabab Fatima, Permanent Representative to the UN from the People's Republic of Bangladesh. You have the floor, ma'am.
I thank you. I thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ambassador Ligoya, Excellencies, USG Fekita, ASG Azikonwa, ASG Vignaraja, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, good morning. It is indeed an honor to be part of this panel with my friends, Ambassador Niang and Ambassador Odotebi, and also UNRC, Ms. Birani from Angola. I thank UNDP for bringing us together. Excellencies, Mr. Moderator, you had set a very ambitious agenda for us to cover. Let me see how I can do that in the limited time available. Bear with me. I shall share our national experience preparing for graduation. I shall also touch upon the way forward and priorities for the LDC 5 conference, which I have the honor to co-chair with the PR of Canada. And especially now, I think that's very, very important as we embark on this journey during a very uncertain times amidst an unprecedented crisis that is sweeping across the world. Excellencies, political vision holds the key to a country's transformative development journey towards graduation. In Bangladesh, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina led our graduation journey from the front. She envisioned transforming Bangladesh into a middle-income country by 2021 and a developed country by 2041. And inspired by that vision, the LDC graduation became an aspirational agenda for the entire nation. It was a happy celebration as it also coincided with the 50th anniversary of our independence. Let me share now how we have come to this point. First, our graduation journey was built on years of continuous and sustained socioeconomic advancement, as this had led And this had led the essential structural transformation and productive capacity building in the country. From a predominantly agrarian society just a few decades back, we are now a manufacturing and service sector-led economy and one of the fastest growing economies in the region and globally. Our extreme poverty rate fell dramatically. Our ODA dependence has reduced significantly, and we have never defaulted on foreign loans. Export-led RMG sector and remittances are the lifelines of our economy. Despite the pandemic, these two sectors have kept our economy afloat, notwithstanding the serious disruptions brought on by the global economic downturn. Our foreign currency reserve remains as high as $44 billion as I speak now. Second, our graduation is a perfect example of a whole of society engagement. The fact that Bangladesh crossed all the 3 graduation criteria in 2021 by a high margin is a testimony to that. And this was possible due to a coordinated effort by the government, the private sector, the civil society, international development partners, the UN, and other stakeholders. We are aware of the post-graduation challenges due to the loss that will come to the loss of special and differential treatment. Therefore, we are working with our business and industries to enhance their competitiveness to take up the multifarious challenges of the post-graduation era. Third, since 2018, we have been working to integrate post-graduation response measures into our socioeconomic plans and policies. A holistic policy framework has been adopted to address both SDGs implementation and post-graduation challenges together. We have done sector-specific assessments and integrated graduation response in the 8th five-year plan. We have been encouraging our business leaders to explore new opportunities for product and market diversifications, and I'm happy to say that UNDP has been a good partner with us in all this planning. Fourth, we have been investing heavily to ensure infrastructure capacity and readiness to accelerate our economic growth and seize new business opportunities in the post-graduation era. We have undertaken some mega infrastructure projects. We are also investing heavily in our public institutions to improve the quality of services and enhance our scorecard on ease of doing business. Fifth, our transformative development journey was also premised on the vision of a digital Bangladesh. Our investment in digitization and connectivity has spurred the digital economy and youth-led innovations and transformative socioeconomic changes. We have seen exponential growth in the digital economy, which is now also helping us tackle the COVID-19 pandemic better. We have a huge youth population. We call them our demographic dividend. We have invested heavily in the education and skills development of the youth to help them reap the maximum benefit of the digital economy and technological innovations. Finally, dear colleagues, placing women at the forefront of our political and economic life have paid us rich dividends, overcome many societal and developmental barriers. Women are now active agents of our transformative development. They have been mainstreamed in economic activities and are now the mainstay of certain manufacturing and services sectors such as the RMG. Excellencies, obviously, graduation comes with certain opportunities. It enhances the standing of a country internationally in terms of its business competitiveness, creditworthiness, and as an investment destination. However, graduation is not without its fair share of challenges. As an LDC moves to an upper echelon of development trajectory, it must forego LDC specific ISMs and benefits. And for us, embarking on this journey this year comes at a time when we are going through an unprecedented crisis globally, which brings about unanticipated challenges to various sectors such as the RMG, pharmaceuticals industry, and other manufacturing and services sector, as well as on migration and remittances. To mitigate this situation and provide support to hard-hit sectors and vulnerable population groups, the government has rolled out quite a generous stimulus package amounting to 4.44% of our GDP, over $14.58 billion. Social safety net measures have also been expanded. The CDP, recognizing the pandemic's impact and additional challenges on graduating countries, decided to give an additional 2 years preparatory period to Bangladesh, Laos, PDR, and Nepal, which brings our preparatory period to 3+2, that's 5 years. Dear colleagues, no single country can tackle this pandemic alone. We would need additional support measures from our development partners. We would need to have sustained engagement with UN agencies and other development partners for preparing a smooth transition strategy to ensure sustainable graduation. We would need flexibility from our trading partners to check out a phasing out plan of the LDC specific ISMs in the post-graduation period. We would need incentive-based graduation pathway. As the Secretary General very famously said the other day, that graduation should not be a penalty, it should be seen as a reward. We would need a new narrative in tackling graduation challenges. As ASD Kani said, we cannot remain stuck in the narratives that was drawn up 50 years back. In going forward for sustainable graduation, we wish to flag the following priorities for LDC 5 conference, and I should be very brief, Mr. Gilpin. First, we must ensure sustainable recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. Focus would be to mobilize international solidarity, reinvigorated global partnerships, and innovative support measures for graduating and graduated countries to prevent any slide back. Second, we must close the burgeoning resource gap in the implementation of 2030 agenda in LDCs. It is imperative to have specific focus and delivery of the LDC specific commitments in the next plan of action, especially in the areas of FDI, FFD, ODA, technology transfer, and preferential trade. Third, migrant workers from LDCs are amongst the most directly affected by the socioeconomic fallout of this pandemic. It is imperative to ensure that international support measures for migrant workers to cope with the COVID-19 job market and beyond is ensured. We expect LDC 5 to come up with an agreement on migration and remittances that will maximize the benefits of migration to LDCs. Fourth, limited export base of LDCs and difficulties in diversification of the same is a challenge, which has been compounded further by the pandemic. ISMs such as trade, aid for trade, trade facilitation, and enhanced market access for LDCs have become more essential in the wake of the pandemic, more than ever before. It is also imperative to invest more in structural transformation and productive capacity building. Fifth, we are concerned about the rising trend in poverty for the first time since 1998 due to the devastating impact of the pandemic. We expect the next POA to incentivize job creation, scaled up social protection, women empowerment, leveraging STI, and digitization in LDCs. Finally, dear colleagues, many LDCs are also climate vulnerable. We need scaled up support to help the transition of the LDCs towards climate resilient growth. Dear colleagues, the graduation of an LDC is not a success for the country itself, but for the entire international community. The IPOA had an ambitious target to graduate half of the LDCs by 2020. That did not happen. As we approach the LDC 5 conference in Doha, we have another opportunity to renew our commitment towards that end. We must push for an incentive-based graduation pathway for LDCs that would include time-bound support measures in post-graduation phase. Bangladesh is co-chairing the PrepCom process of the LDC 5 conference. We will also be hosting the Asia-Pacific regional meeting of the LDC 5 conference, hopefully by end of June. And we are planning to have LDC graduation as an overarching theme of the APG meeting. We wish to remain engaged closely with the international development community for conclusive discussions to create appropriate incentives and support measures designed for graduating and graduated LDCs. UNDP and our other UN partners will be extremely important in this process. I shall stop here and thank you once again for this opportunity to share a few thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very informative intervention. In the interest of time, I'll go straight on to the next panelist, His Excellency Mr. Odo Tevi, who is Permanent Representative of the Republic of Vanuatu to the United Nations. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving me the floor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, Vanuatu is the latest country that has just graduated from the LDC category. That was 4th December 2020. The decision to graduate was made by the UN General Assembly. The road to graduation was not easy because Vanuatu faces socioeconomic challenges that are peculiar to seats, small economies and population, vulnerability to economic and natural shocks, and so forth. Due to these challenges, a graduation was delayed for a number of years. The recent case was in 2015, when Vanuatu was struck by Category 5 cyclone Pam that devastated 60% of our economy, and the General Assembly agreed to delay the graduation to 2020. At the time of our graduation, we had the choice to delay graduation again because our economy declined dramatically due to due to the current pandemic, and also due to another Category 5 cyclone. In the lead up to graduation, we came up with a transition strategy which set up a blueprint on how Vanuatu should manage its graduation during the transition years and ensuring that it's not slipping back to the LDC category. Given the adverse macroeconomic environment that we graduated in, Vanuatu for the first time took a resolution to the UN General Assembly calling for the international community to extend its international support measures for the next 5 years, rather than the traditional 3 years. The resolution is important because it sets a precedent for graduating countries in the future. However, bearing in mind its non-legal binding nature, but the resolution displayed the international community solidarity. After several discussions with our bilateral and multilateral partners, we have found out that financial flows in the form of aid and concessional financing will not be affected to a larger degree. This is both bilateral and multilateral. This is because our bilateral and multilateral partners have their own criteria or standards, and they can be flexible. We also take note that in some middle-income countries in the Pacific continue to have access to concessional financing. Trade remains the biggest challenge for Vanuatu and other graduating LDCs. Access to markets and policy flexibility remain a concern, and this could affect our economic integration into the global economy. And it is important to know the full extent before a country graduates. Some of our trade preferences could be phased out after the 3-year grace period. As a result, we are now focusing on building a resilient economy. However, this is being derailed by the adverse impacts of the current pandemic and climate change. So far, we cannot really predict how the external trade will be impacted, given that the graduation is recent. However, we are expecting a slight decline, given that in the past we have seen that other Pacific countries that have graduated from LDC have experienced slight reduction in agricultural exports due to the erosion of trade preferences. We are slightly fortunate that some developed countries, in the form of trade and economic cooperation agreement, allow trade preferences. The case for SPATECA, and soon to be replaced by PESA Plus, an agreement between the Pacific Island countries and Australia and New Zealand, is a good example. However, this cannot be said about other developed countries, and this will ultimately depend on a good relations with them. Currently, it is clear that the LDC lose international support measures after graduation, and there are no uniform policies in place to face this out. These include trade preferences, such as the generalized systems of preferences, or the EBA, and the special differential treatment for LDCs provided in the WTO rules have no clear rules on how this applies when LDCs are transitioning to graduation. Going forward, there is a need to build a strong coalition around the unique development challenges of LDCs, and also for those countries that are poised to be graduating in the future. So the next program of action will be an important opportunity. We need a flexible and agile international architecture to respond to our needs, so that we are not able to fall back into the LDC category. This is important at the UN, WTO, and the international financial institutions. The UN Work on Vulnerability Index is welcome, and we hope that other multilateral players can employ the same approach in their work, especially with regard to determining access to finance. The reality is that we are still vulnerable despite our graduation. The current global challenges, climate change, future macroeconomic crisis, and pandemics are beyond our ability to address them. They all affect our development prospects. We need international cooperation and an enabling international architecture to respond to our sustainable development needs. It is imperative that we ensure that LDC should not become a force of LDC graduation should not become a force of disruption in our development trajectory. And this can only be realized if we continue to transform our economy and we work together or stand in solidarity to ensure that post-graduation environment can cater for development needs. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you so much for that great country perspective. And now the final panelist is Mr. Andrea Antonelli, who is a UN economist in the Republic of Angola. He's the fourth and final panelist, and we have run out of time, so I'm going to apologize to him, but appeal to him for some brevity, so we'll have a little bit of time at least to respond to one question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, moderator. I hope you can hear me, all of you, excellencies, distinguished colleagues. A very good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm aware of the time, which is not on our side. I'll try to squeeze what I had prepared in a nutshell. I'm standing also on behalf of the resident coordinator, Zaira Virani, who regretfully cannot be here today. But I've been the UN economist who has coordinated and led a task force, interagency, interdepartmental task force, to update a bit a review of the potential implication from Angola graduation before Angola took the decision to request a deferral that, as you know, was approved in the February of this year for other 3 years. I'll try to be a bit more strategic and focus on a few issues. I think one of them is definitely on the indicators. Angola was considered eligible in 2012 and 15, based just on, for graduation, just based on the income-only criterion, which is double the threshold, in spite of, one, the economic vulnerability getting much worse, and on the second side, even the human asset index not reaching the graduation threshold. More importantly, even if we look at the income-only criterion, as it was considered for graduation, this did not take into account inequality, which is especially rife in the case of Angola, the Gini index already above 50%, income share held by the highest 10% at around 40%. So going to the nature of graduation, the rationale behind also the request of Angola to defer the graduation. I cannot say that because this was a political decision, but Angola clearly weighed the benefits of remaining LDC higher than the graduation one. Why was this? I think at the end of the day, yes, we can look at the different dimension, different aspect of the LDC related support measures. We do have a methodology, and as I said in the review, to look at this. But I think that the major, and I also listening to the other excellency and permanent representative, I think the grasp of it, the core of it, can be summed up as relating to productive capacity, or maybe even to strengthening the capacity in some of these cases, to compete in international market while trying to tap also into your own domestic market. We know lately, UNCTAD has developed this productive capacities index. And if you look at the report, Angola ranks not only below developing countries, but even below the LDC's average. So if they had a concern, if we look at most of this international support measure being summed up as allowing country to compete internationally, then probably this index shows why Angola was quite concerned about it. On the other side as well, the development of productive capacity underpins the efforts on LDC towards diversification. And as most of you would know, diversification is one of the major objectives of Angola, and is also well covered in the UNDP report. I was very interested to read that part, particularly in its multidimensional aspect. In this sense, if you look at some of the major policy of Angola, like on import substitution and boosting local content in oil, this could have been quite significantly affected by the removal of some facilitation, particularly looking at the WTO. The final aspect I wanted to raise is, and when I was meeting and facilitating some work and discussion with other DPs, is what is this? Because as you know, the resolution is attached to the commitment of Angola for a smooth transition strategy. But smooth transition strategy towards what? The government of Angola had prepared an economic memo of 25 pages accompanying the resolution, articulating very well the background rationale of the request and clearly contextualizing this smooth transition strategy in the broader economic diversification efforts of Angola through the National Development Plan, the long-term strategy, including institutional capacity building to increase its productive capacity. So this is quite clear. I think as a way forward, it would be important, first of all, for Angola, instead of going through another review at the moment, but to look at all these instruments, because not all of them were used by Angola, and some of them could be very relevant in its diversification efforts. So this will be very crucial. But on the other side, Angola should follow up with the many conferences and events that will be led by LDC countries to advocate for some measures to be extended, particularly as related to WTO instruments, some like TRIMs, TRIPS. This will be still very relevant. We cannot expect Angola to have those productive capacities in only 3 years to reach a level for Angola to compete, at least at the global level. So it will be very important for Angola to continue negotiating on that side. And finally, what I can say as an economist from my side, I think that this report of UNDP comes very much at the right time. And I hope this will lead to a discussion to review some of this graduation criteria, and particularly the economic vulnerability one. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that very concise but also comprehensive overview of what is happening from an Angola perspective. We have unfortunately come to the end of this launching program. We've had a lot of very good discussions, about from the policy side, from the operational side, from the technical side. The PR from Bangladesh rightly pointed out that LDC graduation should be seen not just as a success for the graduating country, but success for the international community, because graduation itself has a lot of positive externalities on the global economy. Everything from trade to economic growth, to social development, to resource management, it all adds up. And so the issues that the report encapsulates and these issues we've discussed today, I hope will be the beginning of a closer look at this issue of LDC graduation and how in a post-COVID dispensation, we can think creatively about. We're not going to have time for a Q&A, but I'm going to call on a number of people just to give very, 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 very brief 30-second closing remarks. Let me start with the USG Peter. You've heard from the report, you've heard from the country perspective. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, ma'am?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as the chair of the LDC group also noted, all the elements that has come out from the analysis of the report that we launched today, and really aligned to the issues that are being discussed, and we really appreciate this analytical piece of work, also because of the 16 countries that are on track for graduation. Most of them are from the Asia Pacific region. So for the next 10 years, the bulk of the LDC group will be from the African region. So the analytical work that has been undertaken will be really crucial to the ongoing discussion of the next 10-year program of action for the LDCs, and also appreciate the presentations by the other permanent representatives of their country experience. I think which will also provide some input into ensuring that that what we come out is not one size fits all, but does take into consideration the circumstances at a national level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency Perks Ligoya, as Chair of the LDC, of the Global LDCs, could you give us just like 30 seconds, 45 seconds of some takeaways for you?
Thank you so much, Raymond, and I am happy with this discussion, and that the 6 key lessons from this study have been noted, and that we ask the UNDP to continue with the work and joining us on the road to Doha, because we have very important milestones coming to elaborate the areas we will include in our LDC 5 document. I thank you so much for this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to the Director for the Regional Bureau for Africa, Ms. Ahuna Ezeakonwa. Any final thought for us? Any closing remarks? So while we try to get her on, maybe I can turn to you, Ms. Rignara Gaja, for your closing thoughts from the Regional Bureau for Asia.
Thank you, Raymond, and thank you, Excellencies. Maybe 3 points that I picked up that came through very strong, that we are listening to a very different set of signals coming in our global marketplace that really speaks to new investments, new initiatives and incentives that our countries are demanding, and this is something we will certainly be pushing with you to get ahead of on this pathway. The second is that it's a very young Africa and a very young Asia Pacific, and they do not see themselves in the 50 years ago measures and labels. As we heard from PR Bangladesh, it's the national aspiration is different. And that is what's pushing and urging these countries forward on very different pathways. And the third is that we had the demonstration. We heard from our PR Senegal, PR Malawi, PR Vanuatu, PR Bangladesh, that there's better ways forward, and it carries the anxiety and moves it into a place of optimism and a very different path, and we can do it. So we've seen leaders leading from the front on this to be bolder in going forward, and we will not be waiting another 50 years in this scenario. But these are the countries that are going to show a new development robustness going forward. So thank you all for this conversation.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. It remains for me to thank everybody who worked tirelessly to make this happen, from the Asia and the Asia Pacific and Africa bureaus, and all our coordinating partners, our comms teams, our tech teams, and everybody who logged in to join us for this event. The report will be posted on the UNDP website, and look forward to continuing this conversation and continue to support the LDC graduation process in both regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.